Hello, this is Branko Malic. In this video, we'll say a few words about some, let's say, relatively random topics, as is alt-right, the nature of alt-right, on which I already spoke and wrote extensively, censorship of internet, and extreme ease in constructive revisionist history via internet-mediated information. These themes are relatively interconnected, as you will, I hope, perceive from my talk. Now, first we'll take a look on something published on Countercurrents Publishing, one of the premier alt-right websites and publishing houses run by, I think, still Greg Johnson. And a poem that was published on this website, which is called Ratko Mladic. For those who don't know, this is Ratko Mladic. He is a Serbian general that was a few days ago sentenced to life imprisonment by ICTI, International Court for War Crimes in former Yugoslavia. I won't dwell here a lot about Yugoslav conflict because this is something that has to be spoken about with a much higher degree of focus and with the maximum amount of sticking to the subject. And now we are going to talk about few subjects, but the publishing of this song, poem that is written by Leo Jankovic, it is, I'd say, high school grade poetry in its quality, and in its subject it is something far more sinister, and what it lacks in artistic merit it more than compensates in sinister intent behind it. We'll try to make a point first about something about alt-right, which I already said, but I want to reinforce it. Namely, alt-right is a movement that, if we are to judge by its leadership, that is, people that are considered to be a public spokesman of it, is the movement that aims at ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is an euphemism for genocide, because genocide, as this gentleman aptly demonstrated in the 90s, is not merely physical extermination of certain people. It is also extermination of any traces of their culture at the given geographical space where they dwelt. And Ratko Rasho here, he was very effective in enforcing this, in fact, policy of Republic of Serbia, both in Croatia and in Bosnia, but in Bosnia he outdid himself. Now, alt-right, which never ceases to amaze me, always sells this politics in a form that seems to be quite acceptable to a huge number of people, I think very young people. And what also never ceases to amaze me is that authors like Greg Johnson really believe that there is no sinister under text or subtext in what they promote. This leads me to conclude that those are people that have absolutely no bearing on the real content of their ideas. That is, that their ideas remain in the virtuality of their quite, I would say, vacant heads, because they are unable to draw the consequences in reality, because idea of the white nationalist ethnic state, that is white European imperium, which is at the center of the alt-right, in my opinion, is a genocidal idea. It cannot be achieved without genocide. Of course, the word genocide is used only to describe so-called white genocide that is supposedly happening or is at hand as an apocalyptic event. And for, let's say, final solution of creating, that is purifying the white ethno-imperium or state, they use the term sometimes ethnic cleansing. And then they employ various forms of population control that should be appropriate to bring this about in a generation or two. And of course they are polite men. They would never use somebody like Russia here to do it for them. Well, what they don't know is that Russia was not the only one, and the first phases of this planned genocide, especially in Bosnia and especially in eastern and northeastern Bosnia, were laid out by so-called intellectuals like Biljana Plavšić or Radovan Karadžić, who was the leader of Bosnian Serbs and so on. We won't go into that too deep. But people that were intellectuals that became politicians. Oh, sorry. But in the end, their executor, the executor of their ideas was this guy. Although they themselves never lacked in ruthlessness. Now, I'm saying this to draw a clear analogy between alt-right luminaries and actual war criminals, which is, in my opinion, apparent. Now I'll read this poem, excuse me. I always forget these subtle distinctions of English tongue. So the poet says, "Shout, Ratko, shout out loud in court, shout at the judge indifferent to Europe's fate. Another horde invades her shores, and all thy scent ends with the sentence and the cell. Shout, Ratko, watch the old streets burn, watch the cities go to hell. In bristles they refuse to learn. Pity our mothers, wives and daughters, left to fend off refugees," in quotation marks. What an interesting poetic instrument. "The crescents come across the waters like the plague or dark disease. Shout, Ratko, shout out loud in court, the rich in spirit judge you, Lord." Okay, I want just to stress one thing. Shout, Ratko, watch the old streets burn, watch the cities go to hell. In bristles they refuse to learn. I will beg to differ. Namely, I believe that this poet is not aware of the fact that Ratko is very familiar with the sight of burning cities, not surprisingly because he was the one who burned them himself. We'll take only the example of Srebrenica, a city in eastern Bosnia, that was surrounded by ethnically cleansed Serbian territory, that is Bosnian territory that was occupied and ethnically bleached, not cleansed by Serbs, of whom he was partly in charge as a military commander, and that Ratko did his best to turn this little city to rubble, although he had his first steps in Croatia when he was a colonel of the so-called Knin Corpus, and he was shelling Zadar, a beautiful old coastal city that was defended by people that were severely undermanned and underarmed in conflict with this lunatic that was equipped by heavy armor, heavy artillery, aviation, navy, and so on and so forth. Won't go into that, but Radko is very capable in razing cities to the ground. This is his specialty. Only you have to give him extreme amount of firepower, because he was not really good at making risky decisions. In all those situations, he was in the position of excessive power towards his victims or towards his opponents, as was the case in Croatia, because Croats were more capable at the beginning to resist his attempts of people like him. And now we have an alt-right poet who wants us to believe that Mladic is in fact somebody who exercised preemptive ethnic cleansing to save Serbs from, as he would call them, Turks. By Turks he means Osmanlis, Osman Empire, people on whom he enacted revenge. Now, this is as war in Yugoslavia is extremely well documented, and Srebrenica massacre and genocide, because Srebrenica itself was just a part of larger genocide, is a best documented act of mass slaughter in the history, and its very documents are readily accessible. This loony bin completely assimilates his justification for what he's done and develops it into narrative. What I find fascinating, not only in alt-right, because you have these ultra-left historical revisionists who are even worse than alt-right ones, although those leftists always try to cushion their words into their ideas into universalistic terminology. What never ceases to amaze me is how meaningful narratives they are able to construct. And the people who are young and who are educating themselves, doing quote-unquote research on internet, if they are not the residents of these geostrategical hotspots as Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia, and others, fall for this at the snap of the fingers. And now somebody who would want to be idealistic and rational would tell me, well, okay, if that's the case, why not fight them with the truth? Because I would not even accept suggestion that you should fight this with some different narrative. You don't fight lie. A narrative is a lie with another lie. You fight it with truth, but there is a problem. In order to explain, for instance, what happened in Bosnia, what was the role of Ratko Mladic, in order to adequately explain this to somebody who doesn't speak language, who never was there, who never researched it seriously, who is not qualified historian, sociologist, criminologist, or whatnot, you are going to have an extremely difficult task before yourself. You will have to do a lot of study, a lot of remembering things that you may want to forget, and generally invest extreme effort to debunk few sentences. And how are you going to do that? It was already done by qualified people, and you can find it all over internet, but it doesn't matter, because people who want to believe what they want to believe in narratives just reject it. and find another narrative that reinforces their view. And for this reason, I think that censorship of internet is very much in order. But only question is who will censor it and what will be censored. As far as I can see, internet is the powers that be proverbial in the West are moving towards censoring sites such as this. I would support this decision. This site deserves to be censored. It deserves to be censored because it is anti-civilizational, although it is full of references of some kind of original white Western civilization. But it is a site that is in fact a support for genocidal utopian policy. But then there is another problem. What will not be censorship? One thing that will certainly not be censorship is United Nations. And those who follow Kali Tribune know that I wrote extensively about the politics of sustainable development, the principle that is enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty of United Europe, and that sustainable development is downright genocidal, but not in a Radko's sense, but in this cushioned, beautifully, not beautifully, by Saharin worded form of preventing births in order to reduce the population of entire globe. That is a genocide, preemptive genocide on global scale, genocide not of Muslims, as was the case in Mladić's genocide, but genocide of all people. Not with arms, but with various methods of inducing, encouraging fewer births, contraception, and alternative sexual practices, that is, those practices that do not end with penis penetrating vagina, that is, homosexuality and so forth, and other even more depraved, in my opinion, certainly depraved practices. This will not be censored. But it is my opinion that criticism of this will also not be censored. So the fight over internet intellectually would be intellectually feasible. Fight against alt-right, if ever in some given country alt-right ideology would come to power, would be impossible because censorship would be absolute. Censorship would be absolute because these are particularist ideas that prevent any kind of criticism when they are in power, and this is something that history attests to in no uncertain manner. The other thing is this ability to be capable of telling lies without flinching. Now, you cannot admit any kind of criticism here because this ideology, the articles you can find here, are so bad and so devoid of any relation to reality that any kind of criticism would destroy the whole concept very soon. Serious criticism, not throwing slurs at them. I'll just offer one. Namely, in this song, these burning streets, the cities that went to hell, that Ratko really managed to send to hell, were predominantly Muslim cities with Muslim European population, because Bosnian Muslims are Europeans, believe it or not. And this was completely unprovoked by anything. This was a plan on mass scale, and those people were at the beginning until they started to organize in first month or two of the war in Bosnia in 1992. They were lambs to the slaughter. And this is a well documented fact. A fact that anybody with conscience would like to forget. And I believe the victims of all of this would prefer to forget about it and move along. But followers of this piece of shit will not let them. And there you see contradiction. We have a site that supports the politics of preventing white genocide, forgetting and inducing forgetfulness that the first genocide on European soil after World War II was a genocide on Muslims. I mean, I am not sentimental here. I am not Muslim myself. I am not ecumenist either. But this is just a fact. And to act like this is not a fact is to negate reality, is to lie. And lying is, in my view, and this is official Kali Tribune policy about lying, amounts to killing a part of the world. And for this, human punishment cannot exist, because it is in human freedom to be a moron, and it is a God-given right to be a moron and a liar, but liar is worse. But therefore the punishment for a lie is not in human hands, and therefore I would always try not to lie, because the punishment following such a reality killing act is something I don't like to imagine. This man got the life sentence, but his conscience will judge him far more severely, I think, at the moment of his death. But that's another story. Anyway, that's Kali Tribune official statement on censorship of internet. I think those who follow my work know that I am not advocate of alternative media. I would be very happy to see much of alternative media disappear, because I think it's a quite sinister social phenomena, that is still in coagulation, but is already crystallizing in ugliest forms imaginable, which is quite normal for something that is born into chaos. It is acquiring its structure and order from chaos. The proper way would be an opposite way. This does not mean that everybody on the internet should be censored. For Christ's sakes, you wouldn't want to censor me. But not everybody publishing on internet considers himself to be out media. Some of us are independent scholars, or half-baked scholars, as I would define myself, and simply writers and publicists. But people who are joining together over political causes on internet media are, in my opinion, for the most part, wittingly or unwittingly serving the rather sinister agendas. Which doesn't mean, of course, that mainstream agendas are not sinister. I just mentioned sustainable development, and I never tire of mentioning it, because a lot of people who will tell you exactly what Ratko Mladic is will not have a problem for working for UN-based NGOs. And if they would look into UN ideologies and teachings, this ease would grow into unease. So how to balance between these skillas and haribdas? I don't have a ready-made answer for this. I'm doing the best I can. and I'm not into giving practical advice, but what I can do is to lay it all out as much as I can understand it. And of course leave the decisions, whether intellectual or moral, to people listening or reading of what I have to say. Anyway, this was Branko Malic for Kali Tribune. Hope this was informative and interesting, and hopefully you will continue to follow Kali Tribune in the future. Thank you for your attention.